Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to Facebook Live with me, Robin Thompson from Red Fez. As always, we will be answering your tech questions, those that you've given us during the week and those that you give us during this session as well. We're normally around for about 15 minutes or so, so we won't be taking up too much of your time tonight, but I hope it'll be a useful 15 minutes for you. So if you're watching this, it's great to have you with us. Just going to give you a minute or so just to get this link shared, invite more people, get them in and get them to come and watch and perhaps even ask their own questions as well. Now, we normally say tech questions, but I know what some of you are like and you do like to give me some kind of weird stuff as well. That's kind of okay. We've got a sense of humour here at Red Fez. So, you know, if you've got an obscure question or a silly question, that's fine too. But we will, of course, be endeavouring still to answer your tech questions amongst all that as well. 3 questions that I've got prepared for this evening, which have come up during the week whilst we've been speaking to our various clients and associates, is Microsoft Defender good enough, or is Windows Defender good enough? I can never remember what they call it these days. They keep changing the name. Essentially, it's Windows inbuilt antivirus software. The next question is, are there any viruses for Mac? That's a good question. Bit of perceived wisdom is that Macs don't get viruses, so we'll be looking at that one as well. And how can I boost my Wi-Fi? That's a real frustration when the Wi-Fi in your house doesn't work and things drop out or you just can't get a good signal. Been chatting to somebody about that this week, and that was a question they asked, so let's see if we can answer that tonight as well. So, good to have you with us. Let's start with the very first question, which is Microsoft Defender good enough? Well, that's a big question. Good enough for what? Let's say it's just you and your laptop at home and you're just browsing the internet and you might do a little bit of online shopping, a bit of online banking, and you use your laptop to store photographs maybe, or you use cloud services. All right, you're a domestic customer, as we would say. If that's kind of what you use your computer for, then it's fine, absolutely. Windows Defender is absolutely fine. It does a great job without really getting in the way. It does its job in the background, it updates regularly, it scans regularly. And, you know, that's all that you want. Now, as an alternative when people do this is they download a free antivirus, and there's many out there, Avast, AVG, just to name a couple. A lot of the antivirus companies do free versions. And you know what? As antivirus software, they're okay, but the problem I have with them is that they will pop up and they will try to get you to buy the paid version, but they will do that by trying to frighten you and scare you a bit by saying you've got this on your computer or this, that and the other. They'll babble you or baffle you with a bit of technobabble and try and confuse you and frighten you into buying their paid version. And that's where I kind of fall out with them, really, because you don't need their paid version if you're just using your computer for personal use. Now, if you're doing anything business related, and that might actually be maybe running a charity or a non-profit organisation or whatever, if you're basically holding data that's somebody else's data or information that's vital to your company or organisation, and it could cost you money if you lost it or could lead to that organisation ceasing, then I think you've got to look beyond the basic Microsoft Defender or Windows Defender. And there I would be looking at actually buying a subscription to a software product that's going to make your whole computer more secure. And that's partly because there's other things that they do as well. It's not just antivirus software. They can provide additional protection, and it's actually quite intelligent in terms of the way it can spot possible threats coming into your system. Now, certainly with any of our business customers, when we're looking at protecting endpoints, we're going to be moving them away from Windows Defender, and we're going to be looking at something that we can manage on their behalf. So we would put a managed antivirus on there, and it's all wrapped up in all sorts of other things that we can do to protect their systems, including running programs that the system's not too sure about in sandboxes. That means separate from the main system. They can't access system files, so they can't cause major damage to your computer if things go wrong. Also, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention, so it can look for traffic that might indicate somebody's trying to hack into your system, and it can prevent that as well. So it can kind of make intelligent decisions based on what it's seeing, all that kind of stuff. You know, that kind of thing you do need to pay money for, and if you're running a business, you ought to be paying money for it. It's money well spent and never expensive, really, in the grand scheme of things when you consider what it does. So, a long-winded way of answering the question, is Microsoft Defender good enough? Yeah, for personal use, absolutely, but for business use or something like that, you do need to be looking at something a little bit meatier than that. So, which actually, in terms of security and talking about viruses and protection from viruses, brings us very nicely onto the next question, which is, are there any viruses for Mac? The answer is yes, okay? If you're a Mac user, I hope you are aware of that. Certainly the perceived wisdom was that Macs don't get viruses, but that's very untrue now. And there's a number of reasons why that is the case. Partly because over time viruses have been developed, and Macs are becoming more prevalent and therefore becoming more attractive to those that want to spread viruses. If you think about it, when Windows was the dominant operating system, if you want to cause maximum trouble, which operating system are you going to target? You're going to target Windows. You weren't going to target Macs. Are they inherently more secure? In some respects they are, because there's a closer tying together of the hardware and software. So there's probably a little bit more of a challenge writing a virus for a Mac, but it is not impossible. And you know, most people who are going to be writing viruses are probably going to rise to the challenge of trying to get into something that's a little bit more difficult to get into, because hey, that's the way it works. Also, a lot of the threats that we see now, of course, are not really from viruses. You know, if you're a Mac user, you can still fall victim to a phishing scam. You can still get emails that lure you in, so that's something to consider as well. And there are Mac viruses. I'm just going to read you something from Macworld. In fact, if I'm being really clever, I'm probably surpassed Windows. So that should serve as a warning to you. There we go. It's on the rise. So we definitely need to be prepared for that. Now, as I've also said before, if you get a little bit lazy when it comes to your Mac and you think it's secure, I don't need to do anything, then you've got a bit of a problem if you're using Mac on a network, because it then becomes the weakest point on the network. It can be the thing that harbours viruses and passes it out to everything else. So you need to make sure that if your Mac is connecting to a network, it needs to be protected to stop anything coming in, whether it's a Mac or Windows specific virus. The same is also true for mobile phones and tablets. They all need antivirus software on them. So let's now move on to our next question, which is, how can I boost my Wi-Fi? Okay, so this can be a little bit of a problem if you are kind of working away wherever your office is in your home, or whether you're in the front room and you're just generally browsing and you just cannot get a consistent signal. Things drop out or things go so slow. What can you do? And there are a few things to think about. Wi-Fi is by its nature quite flaky. It's not as reliable as a cable. A cable just generally does its job, but there's lots of things that can affect the strength of a Wi-Fi signal and the quality of a Wi-Fi signal. The first thing I would say is you might want to consider the location of your router, and you might want to move your router if you are finding that there is a problem. Routers can often not be in the ideal places. That when they're installed, they're often put in the most convenient place for the installation, and not necessarily in the place that's best for a Wi-Fi signal. So have a go at moving the router if you can. Ideally, anything that's broadcasting a Wi-Fi signal ought to be in the middle of the room, but routers generally end up being at the edges of rooms, which means that a lot of that signal is going backwards into the wall, into the outside wall, and probably going to the outside world. So the closer you can get it to the centre of the room, the better, really. Although in practice you're not going to have it on the coffee table in the middle of the front room, because you've still got to run cables to it. But do have a look at where that actually is. Also, if your router is at one end of the house and you do all your work at the other end, it makes sense to try and move your router closer to where you're doing your work, or where most of the devices are going to connect up. The next thing to consider would be to remove interference. Now, there's all sorts of things that can interfere with Wi-Fi. Other Wi-Fi, your neighbour's Wi-Fi, can interfere with it. And we'll just touch on that in a little bit. But cordless phones, microwaves, baby monitors, Bluetooth gadgets, and even fish tanks can interfere with that. So think about whether you've got anything close to the router that could be causing interference. So that'd be another reason to either move the router or remove whatever is causing that interference. Another thing to do would be to consider updating your router's firmware. It is quite possible that there is a bug in your router and it needs the latest software or firmware on it to run as it should. We also have noticed if you're still on a ADSL line, so not a cable or fibre line, but if you're on an ADSL connection, you probably note that you have some microfilters on your telephone points, and if you've got one of those that plugs in and then you plug your phone into one bit of it and your internet connection into the other bit of it, then those can stop working after a while, and it's that can cause you problems, and so it's worthwhile checking that or possibly replacing it. They don't cost a lot of money, so it's worthwhile doing. If you've got the faceplate with both sockets on, you don't have to worry about that so much, but that might be a call to your ISP or telephone provider if that is the issue. The next thing, change the wireless channel. You can go into your router settings and change the channel that your router is operating on. I don't know if you are aware that Wi-Fi operates on different numbered channels, and this allows several Wi-Fi networks to operate in close proximity to each other. But obviously you can get interference from anything that's broadcasting on the same channel or a similar channel. So it's definitely worthwhile moving onto a different channel and trying some different channels and see if that improves things. That will be in your router's settings. Next thing would be to get a better router. If you're using your ISP's router, it's probably going to be rubbish, to be quite frank. Most of the Wi-Fi in them is pants, so I would look at spending some money and getting a decent router with good Wi-Fi. You particularly want to be looking at something that's will cope with multiple in, multiple out. So you're looking at multiple user, multiple in, multiple out. MU-MIMO is what you're looking for. Look at that number and make sure that it will support a number of devices, because the more devices on the network, the more that has got to kind of switch between them. Whereas if you can get one that's capable of handling multiple users, it can do that simultaneously, and it means a better signal. So sometimes you can just have a lot of people on, and it just all goes to pot. They might not be doing anything particularly bandwidth training, but multiple users on a router that doesn't really support it will give you issues. So do check that as well. You can get a Wi-Fi range extender or repeater. We've used those with pretty good effect, actually. We have one in this room, although we also now run a cable in here. But the one we've got is at the back of the property, and that helps the rooms at the back and the upstairs rooms at the back to get a much better Wi-Fi signal. In fact, we found that on the range extender, the signal from the extender next to the router was better than the signal from the router. So go figure on that. What does that show you? It shows you the extender was much better at pushing out that Wi-Fi signal than the router was. And the final thing would be to contact your provider. There could be an issue that they need to look at. But generally speaking, if your router's working fine, if your router is showing there's a connection, you've got all your lights on the router, and your ISP saying no, everything's fine at our end, the chances are that the issue is more to do with that Wi-Fi itself. I'd also throw in, it could be your device. It could well be that the receiver on your device is not up to much. And if you're using one of the old wireless N or even older wireless G receivers, get that swapped out for a wireless AC, and that will perform a lot better. And also make sure that your device has got the latest drivers and is all up to date. Otherwise, that will give you issues too. We did find sometimes that we could have problems specifically with Samsung phones, but no other phones on our network. So I don't know why that was, but it just goes to show that this can be complicated, and it's not always easy to hone down onto what's causing the problem. So I hope that has been helpful for you. Now we have a question come in. Does it matter which phone socket I plug the router into? Yes, it does actually. If you're still on ADSL and you're plugging into a phone socket, you really need to be plugging it into the main socket, the first one that comes in. You might have some that run off that. Now, it might work, it probably will work, but it probably won't work as well, just because you've got another piece of kit that you've got to go through that can add interference into the signal. That's not into the Wi-Fi signal either, that's into the signal going into your router. So obviously if you've got a rubbish signal coming into the router in the first place, then it's going to be even worse by the time you're trying to push that out on Wi-Fi. So make sure, please do make sure that you're using the main socket. Now, I've also got another note come through that it all went quiet. Now, I think when I switched to my desktop, it all went quiet, which is a little bit strange. So what I'm just going to do, I'm just going to revisit that for those of you that were interested in that answer and thought, hang on, what's going on? And that was about the do Macs get viruses. So that was why we're reading the article from Mac World. So basically, I just wanted to point out in that Malwarebytes has noticed a significant rise in the prevalence of Mac threats in 2019, with an increase of over 400% from the previous year. So that's a big increase that we're seeing in Mac threats. They've also noticed that the detections per endpoint increased from 2.8 in 2018 to 11.0 in 2019, which is a figure nearly double the same statistic for Windows. So what we are seeing on Macs is an increase in the amount of malware that's out there and an increase in the number of detections. So certainly now we can no longer have that attitude that Macs don't get viruses. They do, people. Make sure you've got antivirus software on them. And as I said, make sure you've got antivirus software on every device. And that will certainly help you to have a much better and safer and more positive computing experience. So I hope that's been useful for you. We're 18 minutes in. As I said, it normally takes about 15, so I'm not going to keep you any longer this evening. If you've got any more questions, we're going to answer them next week. You can put them in the chat now, but we'll answer them next week. Or you can go on our website, redfez.co.uk, and click on the Contact Us and pop a message in that contact form. Or you can leave a message on our Facebook page during the week. So thanks very much for watching. Hope it's been useful for you, and you all have a really good evening.